Today, we are lucky to feature Josephine Riesman. Her writing has been featured in Vulture, Vice, and Slate, among other places, covering such subjects as Southland Tales, The Book of Job, and Love and Rockets, the famous comic series. Her book, True Believer, The Rise and Fall of Stan Lee, told the story of Marvel's most famous film cameo, from early success to a sad and sordid end. Now, in her new book, Ringmaster, she asks the question, do we live in a world that Vince McMahon created? If so, who is affected and why? Joining her in conversation is Jess Keefe, the author of 30,000 Steps, a memoir of sprinting toward life after loss. Keefe has written articles for Teen Vogue, Runner's World, and Brooklyn Magazine, among others. She has worked alongside NGOs to destigmatize addiction and increase the availability of medication, like naloxone. Here is Josephine Riesman and Jess Keefe.
Hi. Hey.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
This is how you know it's real, is when you have two microphones.
Yeah.
The first time Vince McMahon ever did a bad guy appearance was in Memphis. Not even for his own company. It was for this other company. And in the video clip that survives of him doing his first little monologue where he's trying to antagonize an audience, he's holding two microphones. It's a very odd sight. There was like one for the TV camera and one for the PA system.
One for Vince and one for Mr. McMahon.
Yeah, or that. That could be it too. Anyway, sorry. I didn't even let you ask a question.
Thank you all for being here. I'm delighted to be here with Josie as well. This book is amazing, and I'm excited to get into it. Are you ready to get into it?
I was born ready. Let's do it.
All right, cool. So I loved reading this book. It is a very vivid and colorful story, as in addition to being a fascinating look at sort of the late stage post-reality that we kind of live in now. But so before we kind of get into those deeper themes, I as a memoirist, I'm always interested in the author themselves. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to ask you, when did wrestling come on your radar as an interest as a child?
So I had to do the math on that myself. Once I sort of found out about the timeline of historical events in wrestling, I could figure out that I'm pretty sure I first saw wrestling when I was 6 years old, which would have been around 1990 or so, 1991. Yeah. And it was late stage Hulkamania. Hulk Hogan had been very popular in the 1980s, especially the mid 1980s, and he was on the wane, but I had never seen him before. Or if maybe I'd heard of him. I don't know. I was 6. I don't have a vivid memory of what I knew, what my epistemology was. But I saw him rip his shirt off. You know, this is what the Hulkster used to do. He would take his T-shirt and just use his big old biceps and just rip it open and then toss it away. And I thought that was the coolest thing I'd ever seen on television. And I went to my mom and I said, I would like to get a tearaway T-shirt. Thinking that was a kind of shirt you could buy.
Sure,
right,
common
like
item.
Right, and that's what he's using. He's just using an everyday tearaway T-shirt.
Yeah.
And my mom, this book is dedicated to my mom because, God bless her, instead of saying, child, go watch PBS, she said, okay. And she took one of my little kid T-shirts, cut a slit down the middle.
She got it started.
And put in little holes on either side and put shoestrings in. Aww. So I could sort of go and like pull it open. It wasn't exactly ripping it open and tearing it off, but then you could pull the shoestrings and go boop, boop, boop. And then
so it was reusable.
It was reusable.
Wow.
I wish I still had that shirt.
That's cool.
It was from so long ago. I have no idea what happened to it. But that was my first. But the weird thing was it didn't really stick with me. I remember that vividly. Yeah. But I did not become a regular watcher of wrestling until much later. That would have been when I was about 13 and a half, which was the spring of 1999. Yeah. I had actually really resisted wrestling despite its ubiquity in the playgrounds of my millennial youth. Yep. Because my bullies loved wrestling. They were all jerks to me. And, you know, I wrote an essay about this for Polygon, but there's a special kind of humiliation in being gay bashed by somebody wearing a T-shirt that says "suck it" on it. You know, which was one of the slogans of the WWF at the time. It was the organization, The group D-Generation X, their slogan was, I've got 2 words for you, suck it. And there was something so sexually confusing about all of that.
Yes.
And that was when I got into it because my best friend, Brian, who did have good taste and didn't bully me except when I deserved it, he was just flipping channels, as one did back in the day, and saw something crazy on WWF television. And he doesn't remember what it was. I checked with him. I was like, how did you get into wrestling? He goes, I was flipping and I saw something unbelievable. I wish I could remember what it was, but I remember thinking, you can't put that on television. And that unfortunately does not narrow it down for like 1999 WWF. That really could have been any number of things.
Yeah.
But sometime in the early months of 1999, he said, you got to check this out. So I gave it a shot and I became an addict. And until about late 2001, wrestling was a huge part of my diet, my philosophy, my conception of what it meant to be a boy, a man, which were things I thought I was back then, and was aspiring to be. And yeah, we can talk about any and all of that.
Yeah, there's so much in there that I want to get into.
Yes, but that was my entree.
Yes. So I feel like we are definitely, we came up at the same time. I have a very vivid memory of my
we're like the same
age.
Yes. Yeah.
I had like a neighborhood friend who was very much into Hulk Hogan as well. And when he had the two most 90s interests, which were the Chicago Bulls and Hulk Hogan.
Yeah,
so
that's interesting. Hulk Hogan he's probably a WCW fan. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was we were pretty young, but like we would go over there and like play with action figures. Like
right.
Hulk Hogan action figures.
Yeah.
I was like, Hulk Hogan, I didn't really.
I know. That's the thing about wrestling is even if you're not a fan,
ubiquitous.
It bleeds out into the culture. And that was true before Vince McMahon.
Yeah.
But it happens in the Vince McMahon era in a different way where like you have wrestlers who are cool or at least think they're cool. But even before that, even before wrestling was cool and involved in mainstream hipness, like I remember talking to my dad when I got this book contract. My dad, who is not a wrestling fan, not like he hates wrestling, but like it's not. No one would ever identify him as a wrestling fan. He hasn't watched it, blah blah blah, all that. And I started doing this book, and he goes, "Oh yeah, oh man, I used to remember seeing Bruno Sammartino at the Garden." And I was like, "Are you kidding me?" And he's like, "Yeah." I was like, "You were a wrestling fan?" He's like, "No, you just I don't know."
My
dad took me to. We were, he grew up in Providence, and his dad would like drive into Boston, and they'd see wrestling, and that happened to have been the wrestling that Vince McMahon's dad was producing. So, but the point was like wrestling bleeds out into the culture and always has.
Yeah, totally. And I feel like I loved how right away in the book we get into this concept of kayfabe, which we'll talk about.
Oh yeah, talk about that all day.
I remember very vividly like my cultural awareness of wrestling really revolved around the big "is it real" discussion.
Right.
And how much of that, like, I wanted to ask you as a young fan, and you say interestingly in the book, there's a bit about how much people were really actually thinking it was real, or how much they were kind of just like deferring to the industry.
Right.
So as a young wrestling fan, did you think it was real?
This is one of the great mysteries of my life. I know I knew that it wasn't all on the level.
Sure.
But I genuinely cannot reconstruct in my head what my theory of reality was for wrestling. Yeah. And here's the thing, I'm not alone in that. Mm-hmm. You look back on your wrestling watching, I think most wrestling watchers can tell you this. You look back and you go, oh yeah, wait, what did I believe? Yeah. Because that's not necessarily a turnoff.
Right.
If you're confused. In fact, I would argue the confusion is what keeps you coming back, whether you realize it or not. Yeah. That constant effort to sort what you're seeing into fact or fiction, at least as of the turn of the millennium when wrestling was going really hard on messing with reality.
Yes. And
that was really hard to look away from just because you were like, I'm so baffled that my mind wants to focus on this to try to sort it out.
Right. And then in the later days of after we've all seemed to, as a culture, agreed that it is not real, this sort of still goes on, though.
Well, I mean, even by the time I was watching, it was already known to be not real. Right. That was the weird thing. Yeah. 10 years prior, in 1989, the New York Times had run a story about Vince McMahon's deregulation effort for wrestling. in New Jersey, and the headline on page 1 was, now it can be told these wrestlers are just having fun. And it was this February 1989. It was the end of the old kayfabe code, the old code that said, everything that you see in the ring is real. That was done then. That's 1989. I'm watching in 1999. That has been known public information for 10 years. And I still could not tell you what parts I thought were fake. Because I was so caught up in it that I don't think that mattered to me.
Right. It didn't seem like it mattered to most people. Like it seemed like it was all part of the lore.
And like there's some comfort in knowing that it's fake.
Yeah.
Because even if you don't know the terms of the fakeness, it allows you to watch the violence and not recoil.
Yeah.
Because you can go, oh, well, at least it's fake.
And they still always manage, and you talk about this a little bit as we move forward in time, they still always manage though to place those little nuggets in your head of like, but these two, I mean, the wrestling's fake, but these two guys like really do hate each other.
Exactly,
so.
exactly.
Yeah.
There was this incident in 1997, the so-called Montreal screw job, where something that was, at least for most of the people who witnessed it or were involved in it, like not expected or scripted, something, for lack of a better term, real happened. And the entire industry, every viewer of wrestling, on some level, whether they admit it or not, is still chasing the high of that time when reality broke through. Yeah. And you can really tease people with stuff that feels real and make them at least go, well, maybe.
Yeah.
That's
the fun, too.
That's the fun. Yeah. I know. And no other art form other than reality TV and the artwork of the art oeuvre of Taylor Swift really does that on that level.
Ooh, that is true.
No, but Taylor Swift, it's the exact same thing. It's neo kayfabe. It's the concept I come up with where like you have this false sense that you're seeing behind the curtain.
Yeah.
And the truth is you can stay in character behind the curtain and just be a different kind of character.
Right.
It's still a lie. But people, because they think they've seen something beyond the veil, they get excited and think, I know the whole truth.
Yes.
And that's something you see with T-Swift fandom or Vanderpump Rules or John Cena, whatever.
Yes. Yeah. That's wild. I mean, so another thing I wanted to ask is, in talking about the performance element of wrestling, the book does such an amazing job of really putting you in these scenes that are unfolding in Raw and all the various, wrestling programs. I wanted to know, because you describe it so vividly, do you remember any scenes specifically when you were a young fan, and did anything surprise you when you were rewatching it and researching it this time? Was there anything new?
This image.
Even I had a moment where I looked at that and was like, ugh.
This image is etched in my mind. There's a reason there's an epilogue after this, but there's a reason this is the last image after you finish the last chapter. And there's a reason why the text of the last chapter ends with just describing that image, because it is, for me, the seminal moment of my fascination with Vince McMahon, which led us to this book.
Totally.
I remember it was June, I believe, 6th. I might be getting the exact date wrong. 1999, Boston's Fleet Center. I was watching from home in Chicago, Illinois, in Oak Park, Illinois, and I remember the end of this long storyline about who is the greater power, who is this villain who is so villainous that he's been torturing Vince McMahon. Even evil Vince McMahon pales before this greater power. The greater power orders the wrestler The Undertaker to do unholy things, like threaten to and almost rape Vince McMahon's daughter, like really rough stuff. And they've been trying to build up, like, who is the greater power? Who is the greater power? And long story short, they, the week before they announced, because they didn't actually have a plan for who the greater power was going to be, they decided, well, nobody made sense other than Vince. Even that didn't make sense, but it made it made wrestling sense.
Yeah.
Because who is a greater power than Vince McMahon? Who is the only person more diabolical in the world of wrestling than Vince McMahon? Vince McMahon.
Wow.
It's just or more importantly, greater power, there is never a greater power. Well, now we have Ari Emanuel, but prior to that, there had never been a greater power than Vince.
Yeah.
So it was perfect. And seeing him come out in this, hooded robe, and then in a moment of revelation, whip it back, the hood, and show his face in that image I showed you, I'll never forget it.
Wow.
Especially because I had just started watching while Vince McMahon was a good guy. There was this brief period where while he was getting tortured by the greater power, they were trying to go, hey, maybe Vince isn't so bad. And like Vince is sort of being betrayed as a sympathetic guy. That was when I came in to start watching. So I'm like, yeah, wow, I don't know. Vince McMahon seems like a nice businessman. Maybe he's a little tough as nails, but he gets the job done. And then you reveal that he like arranged the sexual assault of his own daughter. And I was like, who is this monster? And I guess this book is like, in some ways, an attempt to try and deconstruct the character that he was playing in that.
Yeah.
And to figure out who that character was based on and where it came from.
Yeah. Speaking of entities that were once sort of, considered to be good guys, and now maybe that's not so clear. There's a big allegory in the book about the United States of America, the world, the environment that we all live in, as well as, the political figures and political, it's very easy to see how wrestling and the drama of it all, as well as the violence of it all, connects to this other thing. I thought that was really interesting.
Thank you.
Was that on your mind when you?
Oh God, yes.
Right. Yeah.
I wrote the proposal for this book in, I believe, late April of 2020. I first had the idea in a conversation with my spouse, the wonderful journalist and editor S.I. Rosenbaum. We had been just brainstorming ideas for what to do for book 2. And one of us said Vince McMahon. Neither of us can remember which one of us it was. But then I came back to the idea, and that was about February 20th, 2020. And then a lot of stuff happened.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I found myself locked in my little apartment in Brooklyn with my then fiance, and we had 3 cats and a lot of panic and anxiety, and I poured all that into this book proposal.
Yeah.
I just went, I'm so mad and scared about where this country went, and I want this book to be an attempt not to find the reason, because there's no one reason,
Right.
but to trace one line of dominoes that has not been traced before, which is the pro wrestling connection to Trump and the pro wrestling connection to just the broader culture. And I didn't want it to be screw pro wrestling by any means. I love pro wrestling. It's a beautiful art form. Art form, great. Industry, abhorrent.
Sure. Yeah.
And
that comes across.
Right.
Yeah.
That's not unique to wrestling, of course. I wrote, the last book was about the comic book industry, which similarly, comics, great medium, unforgivable industry.
Right.
And they have a lot of the same traits in that they're in their unforgivability. But
Yes, and speaking of perfect, the portrayal of Trump, I feel like in the book is really interesting. I think to me, he comes across as almost like a little daffy. And this kind of was making, it was
Trump? Daffy? You're blowing my mind here.
Well, it's like we live in this world where Trump is what he is now. And it's always funny to remember, 80s, 90s Trump, when he was sort of just like.
Not just 80s Trump. I am proud to say this has 50s Trump.
Wow, yeah.
Because we have a flashback to one of Donald Trump's childhood friends went on the record saying, when we were growing up in Queens, little Donnie would watch wrestling with us. And there was a wrestler named Antonino Rocca. And he refused to call, he just thought the guy's name was Rocky Antonino. And he would refuse to call Antonino Rocca that. He would only call him Rocky Antonino. And so there's this quote of him talking about that. And you do the math and you're like, well, he was watching McMahon family wrestling because he was in Queens. Rocky Antonino, see, I'm doing it now. Antonino Rocca was one of McMahon Sr.'s wrestlers, or his star wrestlers. Donald Trump has been a wrestling head since he was a child. Since he was in single digits age.
The way he comes across in the times we see him talking about Atlantic City and talking about his
Oh,
business.
yeah.
And one of my favorite.
Right, he kept talking about like what an honor it was.
Yeah,
to
he
have
was very
WrestleMania.
deferential, which I thought was very funny.
deferential towards
Yes.
Vince and wrestling. He loves wrestling.
Yes, that was interesting, and also another very funny. There's a lot of like very deadpan humor I found in the book in this moment where Trump genuinely calls somebody right after.
Oh
Vince McMahon.
yeah, I didn't want to draw too much into that because it's a single source story.
Sure.
But Triple H, Vince McMahon's son-in-law, did an interview a number of years ago where he said that the morning after a nighttime show where Vince McMahon had faked his death as a character on the television program, Trump called up WWE and said, "Hey, is Vince okay?" So this is, I know, you want to believe.
Yeah.
You want to believe, but it is a single source
I guess
story.
so. From like a writer perspective, right? Like I felt like you made a lot of really deliberate choices about how to portray Trump in the book, and I feel
had to. He's the elephant in the room, but you don't want it to just be about him.
Yeah. It felt very deliberate, and it also felt very restrained, which I appreciate. Like I felt like
Thank you.
Yeah. So
Jess.
I wonder how. Yeah, I mean, you've already kind of talked about it. If you have any other thoughts on like. Yeah, it's like he's become such a larger than life figure, and especially now, was it difficult to get to that place where you could include him with a light touch and trust your reader to take away what you're trying to say?
Well, yeah, the key there was my spouse.
Mm-hmm.
Like my S.I. Rosenbaum, God bless her. I had a very strict word count on this book because they did not want me trying to reach mainstream readers with a phone book sized book about wrestling. You need to have it be at this sweet spot where people can go, that's long enough that I'll learn something, but short enough that I might actually finish it. And that's what you want for people who are exploring a topic they don't know anything about or have heard bad things about. So I was writing it, and I basically reached my word count and was only up to 1990. And that was a problem. Mm-hmm. And I started freaking out. And my spouse, who had previously been trying to sort of stay hands off because we were like, I don't know if this is going to work, if we try to mix business and pleasure here. And but I let her take a look. I was like, no, I'm really freaking out. This is not going to work. She was like, nah, I'm sure it'll be fine, but let me take a look. Then she took a look and she's like, you are right. This man has had too much life to fit into your word count. Because this book was supposed to be about his entire life. Wow, yeah. The finished book, the last chapter, there's a robust epilogue that takes us up to almost the present. But the last chapter ends in 1999 because we had to... that was one change that happened as a result of my spouse then jumping on as an editor. But beyond that, her biggest lesson to me was just... shorter paragraphs. And anyone who reads True Believer, my previous book, and then reads this will notice that I learned paragraphs can be short. And the other was have confidence that if you just stick to the facts of the narrative is compelling enough that the audience will get what you're trying to imply. You don't have to just beat them over the head with it. Because the first draft of that thing that went up to 1990, there was a lot of excess prose of like, and can you believe it?
Yeah, of course. I mean, you have to. Like, you're processing it in real time.
That's the thing is like, anyone who reads this book, unless you're a longtime jaded wrestling head, and even then, I think anyone who reads this book will have moments where you're going, what? And I kept having these moments where I was writing those moments and going, I feel like I need to draw attention because this is crazy that this happened. Yeah. And my spouse was just like, you just have to trust that they're gonna think the same thing. And I don't know, maybe not everybody does, but enough people have.
Yeah, totally. I think that's really valuable editorial guidance as well. It's also too as a writer, like when you're writing about something that you're really flamed up about, you really want to. Can you believe?
I get flamed up all the time.
You got to get that out of your system, and then someone can help you take it out. But yeah, it really does. Like I really appreciated the way it's presented because I felt like it really was putting it in my hands to interpret what's happening. Yeah,
and I'm not going to call anybody out, but there's somebody in the audience here who gave me great advice early on when I was writing that early version, which was I said something along the lines of like, well, I kind of want to explain how Trump led to wrestling led to Trump. And this person was like, please, God, don't do that. And that was great advice, was to not think of it that way. And I didn't. It's a political book, but it's not how wrestling gave us Trump.
No.
It's how wrestling offers a lens through which American fascism makes more sense, and through which we can start to understand the things that don't work as strategies against American fascism, such as fact-checking or saying, you're evil.
Yeah.
Those two things are completely ineffectual, or you're a hypocrite. You contradicted yourself.
Right, when truth is not a factor.
No,
really
when truth
anything.
and shame are taken off the table, then you can get away with anything. There's nothing stopping you in America.
Yeah, that's the genius of it too. And I want to talk, well, hold on. First I want to talk about, as you were kind of saying before, like those moments where I found myself being like, what? Like I would be hollering to Corey, my husband in the other room, be like, did you know
Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you so much. Did you know about Saddam Hussein? Like
I know, Saddam Hussein.
Literally Saddam Hussein. And also him, you know, presenting these sort of tyrants like Trump and Hussein, they as sort of these like really like starry-eyed marks.
I know. Reading Adnan al-Kaisi's memoir, Adnan al-Kaisi being the most famous wrestler to ever emerge from Iraq, reading his memoir was one of the weirdest experiences of my life, and interviewing him was even weirder. Because his memoir, he does have this story about, a lot of stories about being a wrestler in Ba'athist Iraq, early in Saddam's reign, and Saddam being like, I love this wrestling stuff. It's great. It's great. It's totally real. You're a really strong guy and you can beat them all. Bring people in. And like, what? Like Adnan's going to say, actually, you know, I should say my old friend, because they grew up together. My old friend, no, it's all fake. He's not going to do that. So there's this amazing story, which might be a wrestling tall tale, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's true, where basically Adnan is supposed to have a 2 out of 3 falls match with Andre the Giant, who was not yet named Andre the Giant. He was just Andre Rusimov in Baghdad. And they go there, and before the match, they plan that it's going to be Adnan wins the first one, then Andre wins the second one, and then stunning comeback from the tie, Adnan wins the third one, and it was the anniversary of, it was like the birthday of the Iraqi military, so everybody had their Kalashnikovs. It was going to be this big party. And the trouble is, after they're done having their secret conference backstage, because again, nobody can know that wrestling is fixed. You know, Adnan is being paraded out and shaking hands before the match with all the dignitaries. And one of them is Saddam. And Saddam says, you're going to do great. Be victorious, Adnan. I hope on C-SPAN I can quote a swear, but like, this guy is a pussy. You're going to take him down. And if he tries anything funny, he's going to get this. And he lifts up his coat and has a solid gold pistol. And he says, if he does anything to you, I'm going to put bullets in him, and they're going to have to send him back to France in a pine box. And it was, and Adnan was like, oh, wait, he's winning the second match. And I don't know whether that meant, like, I don't know. So he goes into the match, and like, while in a headlock at one point, neither of them, like, Adnan doesn't speak great French, and Andre doesn't speak great Arabic. They're both fumbling through English, trying to be like, you have to lose this one.
Oh my God.
And like doing it really secretly, because the thing, I mean, Adnan wrote, like, if they had gone through the original plan and Andre had pinned Adnan 1, 2, 3, it was a bunch of heavily armed Iraqis who had felt that their national shame had been ignited, including Saddam Hussein, who threatened to kill Andre the Giant. And anyway, it's a very long story, but like this book is filled with stuff like this, because you would not believe who is a fan and who is a mark. This stuff has real influence.
Yes. And even just sort of that, like, there's like a montage with the whole Cyndi Lauper, like, you know, it's like literally
Cyndi Lauper,
Andy Warhol, Gloria Steinem, like all these people are showing
Geraldine
up, and you're just
Ferraro.
Like,
you're like, what are all these people doing in
crazy.
one place?
Yeah. But I guess it really just shows, I mean, I feel like, you know, my own understanding of wrestling has always been that it was like something that's in the background, but it was never really in the forefront. And it was interesting to read about when there was a moment where I feel like
there were
really
two
was,
moments, the mid 80s, like 1984 and 1999 into 2000. You just couldn't escape wrestling those times.
Totally.
84, 85, and then 99, 2000. Anyway.
Well, I would love to go back to something you started to talk about earlier, because I think that another thing that the book really delicately does is sort of introduce, you know, bizarre reality of wrestling simultaneously being this thing that on its face is like this hyper masculine, like sort of very classically patriarchal
heteronormative
thing.
all of that,
and yet
the
costumes,
the surface, yes,
the grinding.
I know, but not just that. You know what I find most interesting about the sort of queer subtext of wrestling is not the obvious stuff, which is like, yeah, it's sculpted men with colorful clothing and not much of it touching each other. Okay, ha ha ha. What's really queer in a radical way is you have those two men and they have to show weakness. They have to show a lot of weakness. They have to be very vulnerable. I wrote a whole essay about this for Polygon. You have to, the sine qua non for a wrestling match is not strength, it's weakness. Because you can have two people walk into a ring. Let's say you and I were walking into a ring. Neither of us has any, you can run, but neither of us has any particular great bench press, ability. But if you walked up to me and I walked up to you and I said, hey, I'm going to give you the finger poke of doom. And I poke you like this and you go, oh God, no, it hurts so much. Then we're having a wrestling match. You need to have one person who is willing to show their secret face of pain and vulnerability and being out of control. And that is something that I think is speaking as a queer woman, I think is a very queer thing, is making yourself radically open to vulnerability and pain and letting people see you be vulnerable and in pain.
That's beautiful. That really is.
Thank you.
It really is. I mean, like, because there's you feel this way about other sorts of sports, right? And like, it almost makes you, or me at least, I'll when I watch the joy of like a bunch of like men on a football team that they're hugging and crying and
right, it's where emotion is allowed.
It makes you sad that like, I mean, it's nice to see it happening in that context, but you're just sort of like, wow, okay, like this really is the thing that we as a society have allowed the men to have. So I guess that
there's a lot more about it that's queer and trans and whatever, but that's the thing that I always come back to.
I think that's lovely. I think that's really
Thank
nice.
you.
And there's a lot, I mean, and it's interesting too because there are a lot of stories in the book and I'm sure that unfold over the broadcasts of wrestling, but it is like, it's sort of that thing about Vince McMahon too being this sort of like slippery eel of like, because it seems like there's a lot of times where he really earns people's sympathy and you want to believe that he's being genuine, but I guess you just never know.
You never know.
He seems like
he's always got another angle going on.
And he seems like he really, really, I mean, I'm even loath to use the word manipulate. I guess that is what he's doing. I mean, we know that he was manipulating.
He's very
people.
good at manipulating reality and manipulating people.
But some of the people you spoke to, would recount these. They'd be, I'd sit down with Vince and we had this really meaningful conversation, and then the next day he's on, Howard Stern or something talking a whole different thing about this person. And I guess
you're referencing Bret Hart, who I spoke to at length, one of the great wrestlers, Bret the Hitman Hart. I spoke to Bret a lot, and he was talking about how they, very long story short, they had this conversation where after the death of Bret's brother Owen, where Vince was very gracious and said, I'm so sorry, and you can have whatever demands you want, etc. And then a few weeks later, Vince goes on this Canadian sports talk TV show and goes like, I met with Bret and all he wanted to do was talk about himself. And it was so selfish right after the death of his brother. And it was like looking into the eyes of a skeleton and like all of this stuff. And it's very interesting. The Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away,
Yeah. Yeah. He really, I mean, and I guess that is also Trumpian as well. Like,
there are very few people in Vince's life who can count on having his permanent love.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think. There are a few that he can count on loyalty-wise, but there are very few people who can just go around thinking, oh, Vince loves me. I'm fine.
Yeah.
He'll never betray me. I know. Like his daughter now was the co-CEO while he was stepping back because of a bunch of sexual misconduct scandals. Yeah. And then he forces his way back in, and mysteriously she abruptly wants to spend more time with her family. And it's like, she was the chosen child too.
Yeah.
So, and a lot of that's kind of a black box. I don't want to speculate too much about what's happening right this second, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, and you can see, like, there's a huge chunk at the end that is simply the endnotes. This book is very rigorously,
There's like 78
rigorously
pages of
researched.
citations at the end.
Yeah, which is such an incredible feat. I'm always really like, that's so
Thank
amazing.
you.
Very impressive.
I did most of those endnotes in like a 24-hour period because there was a formatting problem.
Oh, my nightmare.
And I had not been paying enough attention to how to do it right, and then I was just
God.
like, I am going to do this. I'm going to
I'm
wake up at 5 a.m.
Oh my God.
And by 5 a.m. the next day, I am
That
going
kind of seems
to
like
have-
the only way, though.
Yeah, it was like a college thing.
Yeah.
I hadn't lived like that in like almost 20 years, but it worked out.
Yeah.
I'm very glad I did that because not many wrestling books have works cited. I'm not gonna say all of them, but a lot of them don't bother with pointing you towards where they got the information.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that really, like, I think that gives it, a level of credibility to what we're talking about
go
here.
check my work.
Yeah. I mean, what was that? So, like, where do you start? Like, how did you make what ended up being like 50 pages of endnotes? Like,
Yeah.
how did that work unfold for you?
Oh, all over the place, very chaotically.
Yeah.
I don't have a process.
Yeah.
Like, I just sort of every given day would just go, what seems like it's the thing I should work on today.
Yeah.
Because it was such a huge undertaking that there were any number of things that were equally valid as next steps at any given point.
Did you write it like moving through the time period chronologically, or did you take on like
I wrote
certain themes?
I wrote it chronologically, but research-wise, it was all everything everywhere all at once, just like that popular movie.
The popular film about the bagels.
The popular film.
Ah, great. Okay, so this is perfect.
Now we're doing the Q&As.
We're gonna get into some questions.
Okay, who's got a question? Yes. Got a lovely person here with a yellow stripe on her side.
Oh, you have no idea who I am. Hello? All right.
We've never met before, have we? No. Okay. Anyway, what's your question?
No, my question is, okay, so you talked about how it's this like line of dominoes, right?
Yeah.
But the thing about a line of dominoes is that there's something that comes next. There's more dominoes, right? So how does this book, I'm only halfway through, but how does this book kind of prepare us for countering American fascism?
That's the thing, is I'm trying to... People keep asking me, how does this book, like, what should we do? Which is always, of course, the big... And I'm like, oh, this is the trouble when you diagnose a problem. People then expect you to also have the solution. I guess the closest thing I can come up with to a solution is let me put it this way. Kayfabe is not the enemy. Kayfabe is just a tool. Kayfabe is something that exists in a lot of different industries, disciplines, art forms. When I say religion is a form of kayfabe, I don't mean that as an insult to religion or kayfabe. Right. Religion is a state of tension between fact and fiction, between the provable and the unprovable, between rationality and faith. You know, it's some kind, your worldviews are always going to have some degree of kayfabe. And I guess what I would offer is pick your kayfabe wisely and act on it. You know, find an ideology. I wish I could tell you what ideology is the right one. I just don't have that kind of brain. But like, find something you believe in that makes that respects other people's interiority and needs, and then kind of commit to that. You know, even if it's something you come up with yourself, it's just have principles. And I know that sounds so... Have principles and have faith in the form, even if that faith is kayfabe, that your actions can have positive consequences. And the main thing I wanted to get was just to dispose of the two tactics of saying you're a bad hypocrite or you said something factually incorrect. We need better kayfabe.
Yeah.
We need a better kayfabe than theirs.
Well, yeah, I mean, that is sort of the thing, right? Like, it's sort, I mean, you know, one side is doing a lot of kayfabe and one side's, it's almost like talking different languages, you know? It's like maybe you need some like flip side kayfabe in order to combat.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It's like you can't live without kayfabe. And it would be really nice if there were a narrative that you could lose yourself in right now and believe the world will be better if we all enjoy the show and participate in this magic. I don't see people presenting that kind of vision right now in politics. You know, what they're presenting is much closer to either they're presenting you just empty calories, or they're the Republicans and they're doing neo-kayfabe, which is it real? Isn't it? Who knows? Tune in next week, not because of any of the ideology, but because you're confused.
Yeah.
You know?
And it makes you feel a certain
And it
type
makes
of way.
you feel something, and it
Yeah.
pokes the buttons in your brain. You know, it would be nice if we could get to a place where there was a beautiful story that we all chose to believe in.
Yep.
I don't know.
That's a great question.
More questions?
Yeah.
So I've been a fan since as long as I can remember. My dad always told me it wasn't real, but that never really bothered me. Because,
Exactly.
well, the thing about competitive sports is it's not like they aren't a produced entity meant for your
Yes,
entertainment,
it's not,
too.
yes.
There's a reason basketball got rid of hand checking. There's a reason
Yep,
baseball
yep,
has the pitch clock. Anything
Yeah,
you're
they're
seeing
trying
on
to. They
TV
want it to be more like wrestling.
Yeah.
Every sport envies wrestling because wrestling can just have the narratives. Sorry, keep going.
They're all there to make money.
Yeah.
You know, if the actual athletic competition serves that, great. If not, you know, it's not
Yeah.
really necessary.
Yeah.
Yes.
True.
Truth. Who else wants to say something? Oh yeah, we got.
Oh, I have a quick question.
Oh yeah, somebody in the back there.
Yeah. So, something I had in mind when I was reading the book is just how grueling of a job wrestling seems to be.
It's awful.
I mean,
it's a
something-
terrible job.
Right. And yet people still do it. It reminded me, since True Believer as a book, of course, exists. It reminds me reading, there's that book, Marvel Comics, The Untold Story by
Sure,
Sean
by
Howe.
Sean
talking
Howe.
about,
Yeah. Friend of
people in
mine.
the comics industry, and you just read that and you see all these stories of people just dying horrible deaths. Like, this person has a heart attack, this person is betrayed.
Wrestling's worse.
And yet it feels like people just sort of do it anyway. I was wondering what you
It's the
think.
capitalist dream factory.
Yeah.
You get told that the money isn't the point.
Do you, I
You
was
get
won-
told that
Right.
material benefits are not the point. The point is being part of the dream. You know, the big collective cultural dream of pop culture. And when you've been sold the bill of goods that the money and the material things don't matter, all that matters is the immateria, the magic, then it's easy to get exploited. And on top of that, I think there's just something, you want to talk about magic, I think there's something slightly supernatural about being in a wrestling ring. I have now finally done it myself for the first time. I didn't wrestle, but the launch event for this book in Los Angeles featured 3 wrestling matches. And, you know, they constructed a ring at this Moose Lodge in Burbank, and I stood in it. And even just having that little bit, even just doing a little interview like this with this person who was interviewing me in front of the crowd, I was like, yeah, I get it. I get it. You hear stories like this over and over again. Where wrestlers, referees, managers, they will tell you, the first time you step in that ring and the crowd pops, you're never leaving.
Yeah.
You're never leaving because you're never going to feel something like that again. And I still haven't felt that because I haven't really had like a pop.
Yeah.
I like just walked into the ring while people were cheering because they like me. But like when
close
you've
enough.
accomplished something and a crowd either boos or cheers, depending on what you're asking them to do, apparently that's a very like almost physically addictive sensation.
Totally. Yeah.
Thanks.
Great question.
Yeah, we got a couple up here. One says ACAB, so I'm going to let the ACAB person go first. Always carry a book.
Nice.
Oh,
Wordplay.
that's great. Oh, it's from Pilsen Community Books.
Yeah,
I love.
You may need one of those.
it's a great spot.
That's magnificent. Anyway, go on. Yes.
So I know you talked about, the book only goes up to 99.
Yeah.
But can you tell us a little bit about like what the WWF got up to in the like sort of special period of American psychosis immediately after 9/11?
Ooh, I'd rather not go too dark. But yeah, the first few years, there's this period from like 01. Fall 01 is around when I stopped watching, not because of 9/11, but because the creative had really been dwindling, for various reasons. Number one being Vince had become a monopoly because he'd bought his 2 major competitors earlier in the year. but didn't buy the contracts of the big wrestlers from his main competitor. So it was just this weird, muddled situation. I was kind of giving up on it anyway. But 9/11 happens, and Vince, ever the opportunist, becomes the first live athletic event to come back. Like, there's 9/11 on Tuesday, and then Thursday Night SmackDown happens. And he comes out and gives this very terrifying speech. Like, you can watch it on YouTube, his 9/13 speech. And it's just, let me put it this way. If Vince had wanted to run for president, I think he would have won.
Yeah.
I don't think that was something he was interested in. But if he had wanted to run for president in 2000 as a third-party candidate, he would have stood a better chance than Nader did.
Yeah. I mean,
Can you imagine if you're a conservative or a liberal in 2000 and you're walking into the voting booth and the option is Bush, Gore, Vince fucking McMahon. I'm sorry, you probably have to bleep that on C-SPAN. You're going to vote for Vince McMahon in 2000. We'd be living in a much worse, much stranger world.
Yeah.
Maybe better. I don't know.
That's freaky to think about.
Yeah.
Well, now especially, I was thinking about this. We didn't even get a chance to talk about it, but like, I feel like you should describe in the book too the Cena-ification of wrestling.
Yeah, right. Because that was the thing, is like there's this period when it gets really juiced up. Like after 9/11, it's not just that there's that scary promo that I was talking about. For the next few years, up until 2007, they really keep trying to push the envelope farther and farther with like necrophilia and, mocking sexual assault claims and like just the whole, and my favorite, Vince McMahon wrestling and winning against God. That was something that you really can't make up. They kept pushing it farther and farther. And then in 2007, one of the most renowned and respected wrestlers in the history of the business, Chris Benoit, killed his wife and son and then killed himself. Mm-hmm. And that murder-suicide completely derailed the WWE. All of a sudden, although Vince was a real jerk to the congressional subcommittee that questioned him about it and about steroid use and whatever in wrestling, and although I don't think he really felt he had much personal responsibility, he did PG-ify the content. It stopped being as edgy as it had been for the previous 10 years. Yeah. But it still retains, although it's not edgy so much anymore, and sometimes it can sort of veer into like, oh, should you really be saying that? But it still has the neo-kayfabe quality of saying, don't worry, this is all fake, except you never know. Right. That's, and also, even if you're not expecting something real to happen, it's saying it's all fake, but we're going to give you all this supplemental material, documentaries and books and magazines, whatever, so that when you come to our show on television or on streaming or whatever, you are basically playing an alternate reality game in your head that we have constructed. Like, about what you think is the reality of behind the scenes wrestling. Yeah.
Far out.
Trippy, dude.
It is.
How much time do we have left? I don't want to, we're good? One or two? Sounds great. Up.
How you doing?
Hi.
I wanted to pull on that string actually about the way that they sort of do rewrite history in terms of like they're defining kayfabe with these documentaries and their stories.
Yeah, because they own the tape library, so it's like you can't make a documentary about the territories that Vince vanquished, the companies that hated him, because he owns them. He owns the media that remains of them. And more importantly, you don't have mainstream media outlets doing serious journalism or history independently about wrestling. So WWE just sort of gets to call the shots. They get to come up with the documentaries and say, well, they partner with A&E, the joke of a husk that is A&E. And they do these like biography segments that are obscene, Or like they did one on China, a woman whose death is blood on the hands of WWE and Vince McMahon. And they tried to sort of tell their own spin on the story of her young death. And it's just like, this is how they get you. They make you think they're giving you the top layer of lie and the bottom layer of truth. When in reality, it's lie, 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 and maybe there's a truth buried in there. Or you mix a few truths in there just to throw people off.
Right.
You know?
And keep it going.
Yeah.
So I feel like you got to
But
the bottom
once
of it.
people have dug something up, they assume it's treasure.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true.
And I think Ryan over here. Sorry, I don't know this person. I didn't know his name.
So you had mentioned that you had been, a wrestling fan, at least his teenage years. Is there any, either wrestler or someone in the wrestling business who, through your research and your work, who your opinion of them or your perception of them has significantly changed, either for the better or the worse?
Significantly changed.
That's a good question.
That's a really good one. Significantly changed. Well, I'll tell you this. When I see interviews with Terry Funk now, I know that there was a lot of coaching going into that because Terry is a victim of what we're talking about. Terry Funk, one of the great wrestlers of all time, I got to interview, and I'd seen recent-ish interviews with him where he seemed like he was, he's old and he's taking a lot of bumps to the head, but he was doing the interview, and I called him, and maybe I caught him on a bad day, but he's taking a lot of bumps to the head. Yeah. It was really rough, and it was it wasn't so much a moral change of opinion as a reminder that when you see the product on television, even if it's a documentary, they took the best takes. Yeah. And a lot of these guys hurt all the time. Yeah. And a lot of them are not going to get better. And a lot of them, there's no union, there's no pension, there's no employer health care they can turn to. So, I don't know. That was one, and then I'm trying to think if there's something more light. I don't know if my opinion of Bret Hart changed, but my understanding of him certainly changed. The big thing that really I tell people about Bret Hart now is like Bret Hart, if he had not had the father he had, who was a wrestling promoter of his own and a wrestler, Bret Hart wanted to go to film school. And when you talk to Bret Hart at length, you figure out why. He thinks like a movie director. Like that was why he was really good at his matches. He's really good at figuring out the beats and escalations of a story, and also is good at vibes. Like he kind of gets what vibes feel cool. And those are two things that are really essential to being a filmmaker. And I found that really interesting. I feel like there was one other, is there anybody else who like the perception scene? You know what? I didn't get to interview him, but when I was a kid, I sort of thought Paul Heyman of ECW and now WWE was interesting. But now that I came back to as an adult, I like 7 years ago had this big sort of Jewish revelation where like I'd become bar mitzvah, but like now I'm really Jewish. I think a lot about Jewish stuff. And Paul Heyman to me now is totally fascinating. I really hope I get to interview him for the sequel because he is the ultimate like survivor in wrestling. He's Jewish, which is unusual. There aren't that many Jews in wrestling, and you cannot kill Paul Heyman. Paul Heyman will be the last employee of WWE. Everyone else will be fired, and Paul Heyman will still be going to Vince and saying like, "Oh, my tribal chief, what do you need today?" So I find him very interesting, and I hope to interview him someday. But maybe that's where we stop it. What do you think?
Yeah, it's great.
Okay.
Love it.
Yay.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much for coming out. I appreciate it.
Fabulous.
Yay.
Great. Thank you all for coming.
And I'll be signing books.
Yep.